The year is 1637. The place is Amsterdam, the beating heart of the Dutch Golden Age. Imagine a single flower bulb, a specimen of the Semper Augustus tulip, sitting on a merchant's shelf. At the peak of the frenzy, this one bulb was sold for 10,000 Dutch guilders. To truly grasp the scale of this madness, consider what that money could buy. A grand house on the most prestigious canal in Amsterdam, a small fleet of trading ships, or enough food and provisions to feed a family for a lifetime. This was not a jewel, nor a rare metal, nor a piece of land. It was a flower. The absurdity of this moment is best captured by a famous, though perhaps exaggerated, anecdote. A sailor, fresh off a long voyage, was delivering a valuable shipment to a wealthy merchant. Seeing a bulb on the counter, he mistook it for a common onion. Hungry, he sliced it up and ate it with his herring. When the merchant discovered what the sailor had done, that he had casually consumed a fortune, the man was reportedly horrified and had the sailor thrown into prison. The cost of that sailor's snack was more than the annual income of a skilled craftsman. This was the world of the Tulip Mania, the moment the modern world learned that a market can detach entirely from reality, driven by nothing more than the collective belief in a greater fool. We are often told that financial history is complex, a labyrinth of derivatives, central banks, and complex algorithms, but the truth is, the fundamental mechanisms of greed and fear are timeless. The Tulip Mania was the first great speculative bubble, a financial fever dream that serves as a perfect, crystalline warning for every market that has followed. The rise of the exotic status symbol. To understand the mania, we must first understand the Dutch Golden Age. The Netherlands, fueled by the success of the Dutch East India Company, was awash in new wealth. A powerful merchant class had emerged, eager to display its status. They had the houses, the fine art, and the imported goods. What they needed was a new, exotic symbol of their sophistication. The tulip, a native of Central Asia, arrived in the Netherlands from the Ottoman Empire. Its vibrant colors and symmetrical form made it an instant sensation. It was a living piece of art, a biological marvel that signaled wealth and sophistication. But the true madness began with a biological flaw. Certain tulips developed stunning variegated patterns, flames of red, purple, and yellow across a white background. These broken patterns were not genetic. They were the result of a mosaic virus, a pathogen carried by the peach potato aphid. The virus weakened the bulb, but in doing so, it created a unique, unrepeatable masterpiece. The most prized varieties, like the Semper Augustus and the Viceroy, could not be reliably reproduced. The rarity was artificial, the result of a disease, and the market went insane for it. This was the first layer of the bubble, a luxury good with an artificially constrained supply. The financial engine. Trading in the wind as prices soared. The trade moved out of the garden and into the tavern. This is where the story shifts from botany to finance. The trading took place in informal clubs known as collegia. These were smoke-filled, rowdy taverns where men of all social classes, from chimney sweeps to noblemen, gathered to trade. The collegia had their own rules, often involving a small fee known as wine money paid to the tavern for each trade. This atmosphere democratized the speculation, drawing in a massive crowd of amateur investors who were all convinced they had found the fast track to riches. The physical bulbs were often still in the ground, months away from being harvested. So, what were they trading? They were trading futures contracts, promises to deliver a bulb at the end of the growing season. This was the birth of the Windhandel, or trade in the wind. A futures contract is a powerful financial tool, but in the hands of the collegia it became a weapon of mass speculation. You didn't need the 10,000 guilders to buy a Semper Augustus. You only needed a small down payment, a margin to control the contract. This was leverage. Traders were trading the idea of a bulb, the momentum of the price, not the physical asset itself. You only needed a signature and a belief that someone else, a greater fool, would pay more tomorrow. This ability to trade a future asset with leverage allowed the bubble to inflate far beyond the actual supply of tulips or the real wealth of the nation. The market became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone was buying because prices were rising, and prices were rising because everyone was buying. The common Switzer's bulb, a mid-range variety, rose 20-fold in a single month. The Viceroy bulb was famously traded for a staggering list of goods: a carriage, 2 grey horses, a complete set of harnesses, and a mountain of cheese, butter, and beer. The market was no longer about value. It was about pure, intoxicating momentum. The inevitable crash then. In February 1637, the music stopped. The exact trigger is debated, but the most common account points to a routine bulb auction in Haarlem where a buyer failed to show up. It was a tiny crack in the dam of collective confidence, but it was enough. The next day, prices fell. Then they plummeted. The problem was the leverage. As prices dropped, those who had bought on margin were forced to sell to cover their debts, triggering a cascade that wiped out fortunes overnight. The contracts, once worth a fortune, were now worthless pieces of paper. The financial innovation that had fueled the boom, the futures contract, now accelerated the bust. The government attempted to intervene, declaring that all contracts could be settled for a fraction of their face value. But the damage was done. The trust was broken. The market for tulips collapsed, and the legal disputes that followed lasted for years, as merchants refused to honor contracts that had become financially ruinous. The timeless lesson of the greater fool. The lesson of the Tulip Mania is not about flowers. It is about the greater fool theory, the eternal seductive belief that, no matter how absurd the price, there will always be a greater fool willing to pay more. This story is not a relic of the 17th century. It is a blueprint for every bubble that has followed. Consider the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. The internet was a genuine technological revolution, but the market's reaction was pure mania. Companies with no revenue, no product, and a business plan scribbled on a napkin were valued in the billions simply because they had a calm after their name. The promise of a new economy convinced investors that traditional metrics of valuation were obsolete. They weren't buying a business. They were buying the momentum, the certainty that someone else, the greater fool, would pay more for the stock tomorrow. The dot-com bubble was the 20th century's tulip bulb, a beautiful, fragile idea that the market inflated into an unsustainable monster. Then came the 2008 housing crisis. The asset being traded wasn't a flower, but a mortgage-backed security, a complex financial derivative. Just like the Windhandel, people were trading the idea of a house, packaged and repackaged, with massive leverage. The key mechanism was the detachment of the trader from the underlying asset. The person selling the derivative was not the person who originated the loan, and the person buying the derivative was not the person who would ever live in the house. This chain of abstraction, much like the futures contracts in the taverns, allowed the price of the derivative to become completely detached from the price of the underlying asset until the entire structure collapsed. The financial world had once again convinced itself that this time is different, and today, we see the pattern in the speculative frenzy of certain cryptocurrencies and the mania for digital art NFTs. The asset changes from flower bulb to a JPEG, but the human psychology remains identical. The moment an asset's value is based solely on the hope of a quick, massive profit, and not on any intrinsic utility or cash flow, you are no longer investing. You are participating in a historical reenactment. The allure of the new paradigm is simply the old, familiar song of the greater fool, played on a modern instrument. The Dutch Golden Age recovered, but the scars remained. The true cost of the Tulip Mania was not just the lost guilders but the loss of innocence. The realization that the market is not a rational machine but a mirror reflecting the deepest, most irrational impulses of the human mind. Every generation believes they have found the new paradigm where the old rules of value don't apply. But the story of the 10,000 guilder flower reminds us that human nature is the one constant in finance. Until we learn that lesson, history will continue to show us the receipts. The Dutch Golden Age recovered, but the scars remained. The true cost of the Tulip Mania was not just the lost guilders but the loss of innocence. The realization that the market is not a rational machine but a mirror reflecting the deepest, most irrational impulses of the human mind. The Dutch Golden Age recovered, but the scars remained. The true cost of the Tulip Mania was not just the lost guilders but the loss of innocence. The realization that the market is not a rational machine, but a mirror reflecting the deepest, most irrational impulses of the human mind. Every generation believes they have found the new paradigm where the old rules of value don't apply. But the story of the 10,000 guilder flower reminds us that human nature is the one constant in finance. Until we learn that lesson, history will continue to show us the receipts.